I am your host, Nicole Will, and we're so happy you're here as we navigate the world with your aging loved one. We are here to come alongside older adults, family members, and the senior living community as we explore the world of aging and elder care with helpful resources, informative interviews, and approachable conversation. We get to do this together, so join us on our journey, and this is the willGather podcast. Family dynamics and navigating conflict with our siblings and other family members definitely play a role in how we care for our loved ones. And sometimes those dynamics can stem from our childhood. How does this play a role as we come together to care for mom or dad? Today, my guest is Michele Magner. She is the founder of Inspired Caring podcast and also offers families and senior living communities that one-on-one and group support. She is dedicated to shifting our mindset on aging, how we care for each other, along with reducing stress and burnout. Michele focuses on creating calm, clarity, and confidence. 3 words we can definitely hang on to as we care for our loved ones. Michele has spent many years caring for both of her grandmothers and working in assisted living, memory care, and skilled nursing. Combined with her gerontology, dementia, conscious aging, and coaching education, this really gives her that unique insight into how to help family members on their aging journey. Today, we talk all about those family dynamics and navigating conflict, what leads to that unrest and disagreements, some actions we can take to step out of the fear and the unknown, what we can put in place to ease some of those family conflicts before they arise. And when we come together as a family, what should we be looking for when we spend time with our aging loved ones? And as our parents and those around us age, how are they influencing our mindset around what successful aging looks like? And on the other side of family caregiving, we incorporate our children and what are the messages that we are sharing with them and the importance of the language that we use. This episode has so many good nuggets of information. I found myself taking notes and writing down the words that Michele was saying, and I know you will too. Here is my interview with Michele Magner. Hey, Michele, how are you?
Lovely. Thank you for having me today. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm so happy we get to do this. I've been excited to have a conversation. I know when we had talked before, I just loved our visit, and I'm ready to share what you know and how you show up with everyone, with everybody else, because I think it's so good and we need to hear it. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
So we share that we both have a special relationship with our grandmas,
Mhm.
and that was a part of your caregiving life. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about that and how you got started and wanting to share your mission with everybody else. If you could let us know more about that.
Absolutely. When I was 28 years old, I found myself in the primary caregiver role for my paternal grandmother. And I was the only family member that lived in town. But what I realized really quickly was it did not feel like an obligation or a burden. I was so delighted to have our relationship evolve in this role. So I did everything with her from determining maybe it wasn't the best time for her to be driving anymore, seeking out assisted living, and her health and financial POA. And then, of course, we ultimately inherited the house and everything in it. So we were with her, we being my husband and I, through her end of life while we were simultaneously having our babies and growing our family. And that evolved into actually helping my maternal grandmother, who also lived in the same city. And I was, again, the only family member. Um, but it was such a special time because our relationships changed in ways I could have never predicted. And so it really led to my career stepping into the senior living world, because as I was visiting them in their senior living communities, I realized how much I loved being in that environment and hanging out with the residents, and my just deep appreciation for the staff, because literally I could not have the women in my own home. It just wasn't feasible for me. So the relationships that I developed with the frontline team members were really special and important to me. So that led me to work for 7 years within senior living.
That's so good about bridging the gap between the senior living and then the families.
100%. And as a young family caregiver, and actually my age, I don't even think really applies or is important of a factor, but you just don't feel like a caregiver, right? You're just a family member. You're a granddaughter, you're a daughter, you're a spouse. And so people don't identify as caregivers. So I wouldn't have even known to seek resources as a caregiver. So I was just, grinding it out during some phases because it's an up and down journey. And then other times, thank goodness, was able to fully delight in it.
I remember when we were caring for my grandma and my mom, and there's that knowledge of, okay, we're doing this and we're in this role because we're family. But you're right, we don't look at ourselves necessarily as, okay, I'm a caregiver, therefore I can seek out all of these resources that are available to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. There's so many dynamics, right, as we work with our families and we interact with them. And a big piece and what I hear from a lot of people is the dynamics within siblings, right? I'm one of four. There's lots of opinions that happen even now. That's part of what we'll talk about today is like, how do we navigate those dynamics, that relationship, some of the conflict that possibly comes up, and having that relationship with our parents, how we interact when we're younger, those dynamics and the narratives from our parents from our childhood. I'm noticing how much it's come into play. I would love your thoughts on how do we come together as these certain roles are really kind of established in childhood and then carry on through our adult life as we care for mom or dad.
Yes. So it's really a two-part situation or question that we're addressing. The first is about our childhood versions and how we are as adults different than those children that we once were. However, we seem to have these narratives that linger as we've stepped into adulthood. I myself am 50 years old, and recently I was just visiting my dad and stepmom. And it's amazing how quickly, at any age that you are, somehow you revert back into this younger version of you. And so I think part of it is just having an awareness that maybe the narratives are no longer true. So even within your siblings, maybe one person was always the lazy slacker, but now maybe they have found success in an area of their lives, but they're not necessarily getting credit for it. So I think one is just having an awareness of what are the narratives that we have assigned to each family member. And then the second is to question, well, is that still true? Our minds, our brains are always seeking evidence to prove our theories of thought. We love to be right. Our brains just love being right. So we want that 40 years of accumulation of evidence that when they were 10, they were a certain way. So really questioning and being curious, are these narratives still true? Or is this just what happens every time our group gets back together? And I certainly am still experiencing that within my own family dynamics. But with a heightened level of awareness, you can become less triggered or upset with people because maybe something that we've been like stories that we've been telling over and over again they don't really stick or apply anymore. And then the second piece of it is as we're trying to make decisions and navigate this uncharted territory as we help aging parents, we each have different strengths and points of view and things that we're good at and skills that we're good at. So maybe there's a sibling and really what they're best at is paying the bills. They're not good at the hands-on taking to the doctor's office. And maybe there's another sibling and what they're really good at is helping go through this stuff in the house, but they're not really good at the doctor's office or paying the bill. So just having again that awareness that we all have different strengths. We all have different ways that our brains are wired. There's so many assessment tools out there for people so that you can understand best how your mind works. And acknowledging that is really important. And then the second piece of it is not judging or being mad at your siblings who are not wired the same way that you are. So they can't, some people just really cannot show up for their parents and watching a parent's decline in a way that maybe another sibling thinks is what they should be doing.
So true.
Yeah, just having that awareness and then determining, what am I good at? What are you good at? It's okay to stay in our lanes and not judge or be upset with each other when we're not doing something that the other person thinks.
I love the no judgment, because we have a family member and they had mentioned similar, where it was like it was really uncomfortable to be carrying in more of some of those intimate roles, but yet they were great at logistics and great at the financial side, and that was the way that they wanted to participate, and allowing for knowing that we're all created so differently, and like you said, finding those strengths, being curious,
right,
having the ability to open up and change our mindset around what our expectations are of everybody else.
Yes. Expectations is huge.
Yeah, it really is. Are you finding that there are certain things that really stand out, that some of those factors that lead to more of that unrest or disagreements within the siblings and within the families? And then, the second part of that is, what do we do about that? How do we set ourselves up for success in that?
Well, in a perfect world, what's happened is that as we're aging, we're making those decisions for ourselves. So we're not delegating those big emotional decisions to other people. So in a perfect world, our parents have completed all their paperwork, their wishes are outlined and clear. And so our job, our roles are just to execute things as they arise. But we know that that doesn't always happen. So I think where the unrest comes from are when big decisions have to be made, especially around healthcare or living arrangements because of safety issues. Money is always super triggering for families. Sometimes there is money, sometimes there isn't money. Who's going to pay for what? That sort of thing. So the workaround is, as a family, can we collectively come up with, our 3 baseline goals that we think are really the most important? So, for example, safety is a factor. If a parent has dementia, are they safe at home? Are they a wandering risk, or can they safely operate a stove? So safety factors is a good baseline. Now, sometimes we disagree with how we're going to meet those needs. For example, if stove is the issue, maybe one sibling is saying, well, I think they need to move, it's time. And another sibling is saying, why don't we put a protector panel on the stove so it's a little less accessible? But that's where we have to put on our patience hat and collaborate together to figure out what is best for the person that we universally all love. And I think that's important to remember, are our intentions as we're coming together, trying to figure this stuff out, are from most of the time, 99% of the time, a really good place. We just love someone so dearly. We just see different avenues on how to take care of them. So again, coming up with your 1 to 3 baseline things. And then when things start to feel frayed and frazzled, how do we get back to, okay, well, is this going to meet these 3 criteria that we have come up with as a family? And then being open to, there's always a different way. There's more than one way to do this. And do we have time and space and resources to explore different avenues? But then while keeping in mind, it might be time to plan ahead.
I love that you have that focus point. I think a lot of times so much is coming at us We feel overwhelmed. We're not quite sure where to start. And I think that was a really good advice. Okay, if we can focus on the three and
Mhm.
start there and have that baseline and our lens, right? Assuming lens of goodwill. I always try to think of that. Like, if I can assume goodwill from other people and know that for the most part, those intentions are good. And we start there. Okay, we both love this person. We both want them, we all want them to be safe. I think that it makes overcoming some of those other challenges a little bit more manageable.
100%. And to really keep in mind that perspective that our brains are just wired differently.
Mm-hmm.
So, what might be your three core values are potentially different than my three core values. So, time is a great example of this,
Mm-hmm.
where someone will say, well, we don't have time for that, or you're wasting my time. Well, maybe integrity is a value for somebody else as opposed to time management. So, just remembering, but again, that undercurrent of what is our baseline most important to us, and then how we get there, it just might be slightly tweaked.
There's another word that always comes to mind for me, and that's the fear of unknown. How do we work through that? Because I think the fear then can also influence how we react, our decisions, having clarity on things.
Oh my gosh, 100%. And what our minds want to do is keep us safe.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is ultimately, as much as we love other people and want to be helpful, like we want to stay safe.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I know that oftentimes a decision can be made, and we know ultimately it may end up costing us something in the long run. I have been flying a lot recently, and I was thinking yesterday on the plane, what is so freaky about turbulence is you don't know when it's coming.
Yeah.
You don't know how bad it's going to be. You don't know how long it's going to last. You don't know how severe it is. Like we're not used to being jostled around in a flying tube. So there's just all of these factors about turbulence. So what do? We look to the flight attendants. We look to other passengers. We're like looking around. Are you freaked out?
Yeah.
Oh, you're okay.
Okay.
The flight attendant,
Yeah.
yesterday, she smiled. She set her tray of drinks on the floor. And I'm like, okay, this isn't as bad as it feels. So we're looking to who are our external resources that we are sourcing to help us gauge. I think that's a really big, important factor. I mean, the other thing, so one is just being aware again that your brain wants to keep you safe. That's what's happening when you get into these loops of what ifs, what ifs, what ifs. Two, looking around, who are my resources, and how, on a scale severe is what I'm in and what could be coming. And then I would say three is we always over dramatize in our minds potential outcomes. And just if you reflect back on some of the most turbulent times in your own life, a lot of times it's not the outcome that you were the most afraid of. So just keeping your brain in check that I always blow this so much further than what usually happens. And honestly, when it comes to healthcare and aging parents, sometimes it is the worst case scenario, or sometimes the worst case scenario you envisioned isn't actually the worst case scenario. So just being compassionate with yourself, flexible and compassionate with yourself is so important. Just where I'm doing the best I can with the information that I have right now. Like I am operating at the speed of information. And when I have more or better or different information, then I will know that I can make that next choice.
Mm-hmm. There's this conversation too around stress and mental health and all that's going on. And similar to what you were saying about the expectations of others and keeping that into account of what our gifts are and what our strengths are, but also maybe getting an understanding of what are other challenges that are in my family member's life that might be holding them back or might be hard for them at that time, and kind of being aware of that too. And I had a really good friend of mine give me some really good advice. I was going into one of those modes where I can't remember the situation, but I was worst case scenario, right?
Right.
and that self-talk. And she was like, okay, so what if it is the worst case? What you
Hmm.
worrying and being so concerned about it might not change the outcome, but that interim you feel so out of sorts. And she had really good questions for me in terms of, would you tell your daughter that if she came to you and was really upset about something? No, you would tell her, take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. Don't go into
Hmm.
fear, all those things. And I think it's like, if we can remember to talk to ourselves like we would our best friend or our child and our parent, and that reassurance, I think it would get us a little bit further. It's hard to do in the moment when we're having a
Yeah.
really a really hard day, but yeah.
No, for sure. And we have to remember that worrying isn't planning.
Mm,
Worrying isn't planning.
I
And
love that.
so, again, your mind wants to keep you safe. It's running the scenarios so that you can try and pre feel an emotion. You're
Mm,
trying to avoid feeling sad or distant or disconnected or afraid. So, we have to look back, reflect on what are some scenarios where I have actually made it through something pretty tough.
mm-hmm,
And what did I do to get through that time?
mm-hmm,
And is that going to work for me? We cannot pour from an empty pitcher.
mm,
And this is what really gets me up in the morning every day is how are we taking care of the people that are taking care of the people?
yeah.
How are caregivers taking care of themselves?
Mm-hmm,
So whatever those things are for you, and I would encourage people when you're in that moment of calm and you're not in the thick of it, to just jot down a few things that help you feel reset and recentered,
mm-hmm.
because that is what can put your brain into more of a planning mode as opposed to a worrying mode.
That's a great statement. Worrying isn't planning. I wrote it down. I'm going to remember that one. And there's that when you referenced, if we look back and think of the things that we have overcome, that we can get to that other side. It's that whole idea of, right, we don't have confidence in things unless we've actually been through them, but we don't build that confidence muscle unless we've been through the hard thing. It's kind of that chicken or the egg. And I think in caregiving, there is a lot of, when we haven't walked through that before, we have to build the skill, develop more of our self confidence in what we're doing. We're seeking that guidance, like you had mentioned. Okay, looking around, where's kind of the state of who's that support. And there's a word that I think is becoming more of a conversation in caregiving, and that's all around boundaries. And it's
Mm,
also dealing with, right, in relationships in general, which
yeah.
I think, when we care for others, it's all relationship dynamics. And I would just love for you to share more about your thoughts on boundaries, how that works in those sibling dynamics, even with our parents and those childhood roles, and what we're navigating out of, kind of what that can set us up for
Yeah,
that
yeah.
success.
Just unpack boundaries in 90
Yeah,
seconds.
let's do it. That's a whole podcast in and of
I
itself, I'm
mean,
sure.
I'll tell you,
But,
boundaries as a family caregiver is
mm-hmm,
has been one of my greatest struggles. And
mm,
as a middle-aged woman, it's
mm-hmm,
something that I'm starting to finally step into.
mm-hmm.
And I just read a great book on this, which I'm happy to share that author name. And
Yeah, please.
so it's called Brave Boundaries, and it's by Dr. Sasha Shulkat. And really, she's a physician, a mother of four, and also has a side business entrepreneur. But this book about boundaries was really enlightening to me. I think, again, the first thing, it comes back to awareness. Like, why do I have the boundaries that I do, and where did they come from?
Mm,
And there's just a lot of emotional labor to helping aging family members. So sometimes boundary lines can get blurred because we want to jump in and be helpful and show that we love people. But I think a great assessment tool are your love languages. And when you know what your top love languages are, it helps you understand your boundaries and where maybe you've had some blind spots or had boundaries you feel like have been taken advantage of. But getting clear on them is top of mind, getting clear on what those boundaries are. Maybe it's your own exercise program or meditation program, or you just need those 15 minutes before the whole house wakes up, or really setting a hard time or deadline on something. The second thing is, obviously we want boundaries with other people, but I find a lot of times it's the boundaries with myself that I struggle with, the consistency of it. And I just, again, go back to offering people to have grace with themselves. And when you realize that you are off course with a boundary, to gently circle back or swiftly, whatever it is you need, so that you can be taking care of yourself. Because we cannot give what we do not have. My son would ask for chicken nuggets sometimes, and I'd be like, buddy, there's none in the freezer. I cannot give you what I do not have. It's the same thing when it comes to boundaries. It all gets very swirled up when we're talking about childhood narratives and family dynamics. But getting clear on a couple things that are just really important to you, and that I think goes back to knowing what your values are, your core intrinsic values, I think is really helpful, because that will help you understand what your boundaries are.
That's such a good point. And I think you're right. In families, boundaries are complex. And even with ourselves, there's that whole, I'm trying to think of the word, when we honor our boundaries, it can make other people feel very uncomfortable. And
even us,
I know. And you feel like you're doing something wrong initially, because you're like, I'm saying no to something, or whatever the case may be. Where it gets really complex in family dynamics is that we're maybe taught or still learning that we're not responsible for the reaction to the boundary that I hold. Yes. And when you're in those personal dynamics, you want to then still have the open communication and still have the relationship. So it's complicated, and I think it's hard to know how much to hold that line. You want to show love to the people that you're in relationship with. Anyways, those are some of my thoughts around it, but it gets tricky, but it's important, because we will feel good. I always feel my best when I honor the commitments that I make to myself,
Yes, absolutely. And doing those check-ins with yourself of, does this feel good? Does this feel right? Is this what's actually important to me? Because I think a lot of times within siblings, especially, we're willing to go to battle over anything and everything. But when we learn to pick our battles, like, is this the hill I'm willing to die on? Because if we're going to pick on everything, every step of the way, there's something else happening there that's an undercurrent of dissatisfaction. So understanding what it is that's really the most important to you can help you identify boundaries. I'll tell you, when I feel stressed, or frustrated with somebody else and their behavior, my go-to is now to hold up a mirror and see where in my own life is that out of alignment, to use some newer terms. Because a lot of times, if I feel like somebody else's integrity is out of alignment, I think, well, where in my life do I feel out of alignment with my own integrity? Because you're right. We can't control how people respond. We can't control what they do. Boy, we have a lot of really good ideas for other people, though. If they would just do this stuff, everything would be so much easier. But we know that we can control our own thoughts, our own responses and reactions, and what's most important to us.
Such good advice for people. Such good advice. More recently, I've been telling myself, okay, do I really care about this issue? Like you said, is this the hill I want to die on? Or do I just say no because I've always said no, but do I really care? It's like you said, getting clear on what are those really fundamental priorities for us. I don't think this episode obviously will be released before the holidays. We're recording in December. but a conversation around, okay, family get-togethers, dynamics, holidays are coming up, but it could be for any holiday, right? Easter, birthday, whatever the case may be.
Right.
What should we be looking out for, right? As siblings, if we get together with mom or dad or the whole family, are there some things that stand out of, okay, we're going to kind of take note of some things and kind of see what's going on?
Right. So I actually just did an episode on this, and assisted living in my community, in my town, came up with a really comprehensive list. That's super solid. The first thing is, how engaged are your parents with their daily activities in life? I know COVID has obviously shifted gears for a lot of people, but have they resumed some or any activities, or are they really isolating themselves, and have they shrunk their social circle? So that's the very first thing I'm looking for. Another thing is, when they're walking around their home and moving about, how's their balance? Are they kind of staggering around, or are they reaching for counters and walls to balance themselves as they walk around, or has that changed at all? Obviously, area rugs or throw rugs are one of the top tripping hazards. The fire department will tell you that. So safety protocols within the house, are there things that maybe could be adjusted? Maybe a table moved slightly to clear a path. Now, don't go moving around everybody's stuff without them.
Like, what's happening? Yeah.
I know. Have them wake up and their living room is rearranged. But just to be aware of that and offer, I noticed as you were walking through, that seems to be in your way. How would you feel if we moved that? Another really easy low-hanging fruit is pills. A lot of times people will keep their pills in the kitchen because they're taking the pills with meals. Like, if it's Wednesday, are their pills still in the box from Monday and Tuesday? Or sometimes those little pills jump out of the pill box and onto the counter. So, just asking, what's this, or what's this pill for, to get some ideas if they're taking their medications properly is really important.
That's a great place to start.
Yeah.
It's a great place. And we can send people, is it on your website that they can go and learn more about kind of what are some of those things to look at you mentioned?
On my website, there's the link to the podcast. And so I think it's titled like What to Look For.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. It's so nice to have those handy
things. I was grateful to this woman to putting together. I just read it.
Amazing. Yeah.
I was grateful to her for putting it together, and she gets full credit in the episode.
Oh, perfect. Well, and it's true. We learn things and then we get to share that with everybody and, spread all of the good info around. I know you had also shared about our thoughts around when we're interacting with mom or dad. Our thoughts around our own aging are influenced by what we're witnessing, what we've experienced with grandparents, possibly their own challenges. How have you seen this play out? Is it like, obviously we have a guide, but for everyone it's so different, and our own perceptions of what that looks like for us.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first of all, just as you were looking at your parents, keep in mind, they don't feel their chronological age 90% of the time. Like, when they wake up in the morning, I mean, legitimately, even in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, they're still thinking 40s, 50s, 60s. So they have never been this age before either. So when we wake up, or when we get together and we have ideas about what should or shouldn't be happening at certain ages, just remember, we've not been that age yet. I've never been 77. I have no idea what it feels like to be in a 77-year-old body. Yeah. So having some empathy and grace for that. And then for our own aging journey, again, I'm 50. I, on any given day, feel that I'm about 35, 36. And our self-perceptions are really, really critically important. This semester in my master's program, I took aging and human behavior, and we talked a lot about successful aging. And we have our own ideas about what that looks like and means and what people should and shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
but it's really complicated actually. And there are a lot of factors at play. And we have to be, I mean, nobody has to do anything, but I'm just inviting people to consider just
I
to be
love that
open.
language. Invitation.
I invite you to consider being open-minded about what it means to age successfully, because we're going to have different definitions. For some people, what would be quality of life is being able to feed themselves and watch football. And that's what they care about. But everything else doesn't matter, right? So that person isn't going to be out on a hiking trail, but they feel like they're aging successfully. And so just for ourselves, as we're aging, we get to decide what that looks like. We get to look to role models to determine how we want to be showing up. Our genetics, there's a genetic component to this. We get handed our DNA, but what cells are awake or asleep are determined by our lifestyle. There's just no way around it. Like, how we are taking care of our bodies is so important, and it helps us to age well biologically. Certainly there is disease and illness and accident, and those things happen. If you go to the CDC website and look at what are the top chronic diseases, it'll tell you diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and then how to prevent chronic disease. It's all lifestyle habit stuff that we just have to chip away at day in and day out and do what's best for our bodies. Like, you would never, ever, ever put water in your car gas tank.
Right. It wouldn't run.
It just won't run. So thinking about your own body, if you are continually feeling sluggish and exhausted, look at what you're putting in your gas tank. Look to what you're eating, because maybe there's just one thing, like one ingredient and one thing that you just happen to be eating every day that just doesn't work for your body. It can just make such a huge difference.
I discovered that recently. I've always been able to eat wheat my whole life, and I've never had an issue. In the last 2 years, I have major issues. So I had to go into that whole, I'm not feeling my best self. What is going on here? And diving into like, okay, making those hard changes. But then when you feel so much better, those changes can be worth it. But it's hard, right? You're changing your habits. You're doing something totally new.
Right. I mean, I found that between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., I was like clearing my throat a lot. And it like woke up one day and was like, what is happening? Why is this happening? And it was the creamer I was putting in my coffee. And I just switched to a non-dairy creamer, and then I eliminated creamer, and that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
Now I know I did clear my throat during this time period, but
it's all right. We got
it. Yeah. So it's just that mindful awareness, and our expectation is that things are magically going to happen, but sometimes it can take quite a while. But just don't give up on yourself, because you're, God willing, going to continue to age every single day. So you get to have a greater influence on that and how that happens than you realize.
So the other side, you were having little kids as you were caring. And so they're a part of that. They witness. I know my kids were a big part of caring for my grandma, and I would bring them with me to the nursing home and include them in that. And it ties in what we were talking about our parents, their perception of aging influences our perception of aging, which then as parents, we model that for our children. And the goal is really to raise kids that can be resilient and adapt. Do you see that ties together as well? I'm
Absolutely.
Sure, but also your experience.
Absolutely. And it circles back to the language that we're using about ourselves and about our elders and that are in our life, and the circle of influence that we have around us. It's just so critically important to be mindful of the language that we use. And this is a sneaky little thing that starts to happen in our 30s as we start joking about being old. Well, that made sense when we were born in the year 1900, because the life expectancy for women was age 24 and the life expectancy for men was 50. So it totally made sense that in our 30s, we would say, well, I'm old, I'm over the hill. But now our life expectancy is 77. So the language that we're using around our kids, the language about being grateful, like what a gift our day is, or this time with our elder, is so important as well, because they're watching and listening to everything. They're watching how we are handling issues and problem solving. And, is our go-to to drink a bottle of wine at night after a stressful day, which that used to be my solution, but maybe going for a walk or to a boxing class is a better, healthier option. So just paying attention to how we are speaking to ourselves and how we're behaving is so important.
Yeah, the modeling. I have caught myself. I used to probably use language like that. Oh, I'm
Mhm.
getting older, or, I
Mhm.
am getting older, but instead of saying, oh, I'm so old or whatnot. And I really had to be conscious about what is the language I'm using, not only telling myself, but that my kids are hearing. And
Yeah.
so it's been interesting. It's just like, okay, I'll just pay attention to that because it's true. I'm in my 40s and I want to model that it is okay to have wrinkles and
Mhm.
gray hair, whatnot, that we're going to
Yeah.
shift and adapt into rather than face it with so much fear and negativity, I guess is my point,
Well, yeah.
is holding space for the frustration and challenge, but also being open to let's change our lens on it a little bit more. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, resistance is exhausting.
Mm,
So when we are in a place of acceptance
mm-hmm.
and productive processes on like, well, what can I do? That is much less exhausting than feeling like we're up against a battle or rolling a boulder uphill or resisting something, especially when it's inevitable. I mean, let's face it, this is a gift and it will continue.
Mm-hmm.
But what's so interesting that I've learned that I don't know if people are aware of is on a cellular level, our cells are turning over all the time. And so they regenerate. So our skin, our most of our major organs, our whole body is different today than it was even 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. So just being aware that your body is miraculous. And when we don't get so caught up on maybe a number on a scale or a pant size, things like that, like your body is just working so hard for you. So that can help have more powerful, positive language about what is possible and what is coming.
So good. I've been writing down all your like amazing sentences. I'm like, okay, that's a good one. That's a good one, which is what we hope for when we listen and take in new information. It's those where you can walk away and go, okay, that resonated with me. And you do so much for families and individuals. You have your Inspired Caring podcast. Can you share with us all that you do and how you support families and where they can learn more and find out more about working with you?
Absolutely. Inspired Caring podcast is on the major platforms, Apple, Spotify, etc. I think Amazon now, Amazon Music. But that really started with me just thinking through, what do people need to know? What do they want to know? And then going into support groups online and seeing the bigger, more challenging questions that people were having. And I thought, well, I can find some information on that. And so then I would respond to those via the podcast. And then I have such amazing industry expert people that I am connected with, such as yourself, that I started interviewing people to get their area of expertise. So there's a lot on the podcast about palliative care, hospice, home health, how to make the home safe, just tons of different resources, which is fabulous. And then my coaching practice is I do one-on-one coaching for just a handful of people annually. And then I have a group program. My next group is launching in January. And it's a 3 months together where there's videos and a workbook, but mostly what we're looking for is that community and being in the same room virtually with other people who are on this journey, because we learn so much just by listening to what other people are experiencing. And then I'm working and coaching with people through that platform.
We do. We learn so much from others and feel less isolated and just supported, which is so helpful. And your website is
MicheleMagner.com. And there's only one L in Michelle. So
okay.
It's MicheleMagner.com.
Perfect. And I will include all of that in our episode description so they can scroll up or down. I never know how to say that. Up.
Yeah.
and see and click on the link, which is so good. Michele, I've enjoyed our time. I know you and I could talk for hours, I'm sure, but I'm looking forward to being in touch with each other and supporting each other's work because I love the message that you share. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Nicole. This has been wonderful.
Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.